strategies or tactics that America use to overthrow legitimate government. Whenever America wants to get rid of a legitimate government, they will employ certain tactics, as you see with Venezuela, as you see with Libya, as you see with Iran, and as you see with Iraq. The first tactic they will employ is to place sanctions on that country. Now, why do you place sanctions on that country or those countries? Sanctions won't affect politicians directly. No amount of sanctions placed on a country will affect the leader of that country directly. In other words, if you place a sanction on a country, those leaders will still be buying the same amount of groceries at the supermarket. Those leaders will still be filling up their gas tanks at the gas stations. Who will face the hardship through those sanctions? The citizens of that country. And that is what America is hoping. By placing sanctions on a country, they know that the citizens will suffer directly. They are hoping that the citizens who are suffering will stage a coup or an uprising and overthrow that elected government. Now, if that don't work, they employ strategy number 2. Strategy number 2 is to fund the opposition or fund a rebel group or a freedom fighter group, as they would call it. Because you have to understand, yesterday they were terrorists, but today they can be called rebel group or freedom fighters. That label, is interchangeable according to what fit the Americans' narrative. Yesterday they were terrorists, today they are freedom fighters or rebels. Alright, as we see in Libya, as we see in Syria, as we see in Iraq, and as we see what happened in Venezuela, South America in the 1970s and 80s in the heights of the Cold War. Alright, the CIA was actually funding the Contras down there in Nicaragua. That is how Noriega ended up on the CIA payroll, where the CIA would ship guns to the Contra and the Contra would ship cocaine back to America. Long and complicated story. With the knowledge of the President of America. Right? So, tactics number 2 is to fund rebel groups or freedom fighters, they call it. So they will send the CIA operatives into that country, train them, fund them with weapons and all of that. It happened so close to us as well. Even in Haiti, when they wanted to get rid of Aristide, I think that's what they did. That's where you see all the guns coming from into Jamaica now. Is a kind of spill off of the overthrowing of Aristide, where the Americans, because they wanted to overthrow Aristide in Haiti, they fund a lot of guns into that country to help overthrow Aristide. And once overthrowing of Aristide was done, the Haitians were left with thousands of guns. So they ended up trading the guns to Jamaicans for meat, marijuana, whatever they can trade. They will trade the guns to Jamaicans for that. As I said before, tactics number 2 is to fund rebel groups within that country. And if that don't work, then it's a full-scale invasion. It's a full-scale invasion. Now, a full-scale invasion is usually the last option. Why? The Vietnam War. Vietnam was a disaster for America. They lost the Vietnam War. Thousands of Americans died in that war. And the citizens were very upset that their sons and their daughters lost their life in Vietnam. So, America tend not to want to deploy boots on the ground to fight war, because there will always be casualty. No matter how skilled, no matter how well prepared your army is, you're going into a country, invade a country, and there is war, there will always be casualties. So, If America invade a country like they did in Iraq, there was thousands of American soldiers who lost their lives in Iraq. The initial battle was very one-sided. I mean, they just bombarded Iraq overnight, killed thousands of Iraqis, which you don't see on the media. So most people don't. When I watch those CNN clips and they see them bombing Iraq, you could believe that they're bombing some desert where nobody lives. But in that initial bombardment, thousands of Iraqis died. But the real death toll was actually after the bombardment, because they bomb water supply, power company, food factories. So thousands of citizens died of hunger and all sort of impoverished condition after they bombed their critical facilities, as they would call it. So invading a country will cost the Americans casualties on their side in terms of loss of lives of soldiers. And they don't want that, because the American people are very skeptical